Let's see who's sponsoring tonight's Hazmat Guys Roundtable. Hazmat 101 Consultants. Hazmat 101 Consultants and their instructors can provide quality consulting and virtual or in-person hazardous materials training for your agency. Owner and lead instructor Bob Cascignano is also available for lecturing at your fire or hazmat conference and has in fact done many speaking engagements across the country. Visit their site at www.hazmatconsultants.com or email Bob Cascignano at bob@hazmat101consultants.com. For over 20 years, K&R Plaques have had the pleasure of helping clients choose awards for the people they want to honor. Their state-of-the-art equipment allows clients to design, customize, and personalize the awards they choose for that special someone. With one of the largest selections of plaques, awards, trophies, and clothing apparel, they can deliver quality products to satisfy any customer needs. No order is too big or too small. Visit their website at www.knrplaques.com or email at sales@knrplaques.com. Responder Training. RTE is the leading company in delivering propane training along with emergency response equipment. Responder Training has many propane flaring kits, water injection kits, accessories, and replacement parts available. They also sell the only commercially available 1-inch propane flare kit, appropriately named the Dragon Slayer, because size does matter. Contact our good friend, owner instructor Ron Huffman for more information. You can reach him at 765-524-4848. You can email Ron at respondertraining.rdh.gmail.com or peruse his website at respondertraining.com. If you'd like to sponsor the show and help keep live hazmat conversations coming in the future and help send at least one lucky participant to a national level hazmat conference, send an email to bob@thehazmatguys.com and he'll send you the information. Thanks a lot. Now on with the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Hazmat Guys Roundtable. I guess I'm the temporary co-host. I'm Cascignano. Bobby is on a top secret assignment. Mike Monaco is on another top secret assignment. With me in my upper left corner is the wonderful Jeff Sitek and our special guest, Mr. Mike Callan. Mike, how are you?
Good. I'm doing good. Doing good.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We have really been looking forward to this. We've had a lot of great guests pop up and share their wealth of knowledge and how things were and how things are and maybe how things should be.
Oh.
So with that, tell everybody a little bit about yourself. Those who maybe obviously have been under a rock and have no idea who you are because you're pretty well known.
Well, I appreciate that. I would start and probably rule out 3/4 of the audience. I joined the fire department before most of them were born. I came on the job in January 2nd, 1972. I didn't even know I was hired. They had asked me to come down the week before, and I tried on boots. They said, come on down on the 2nd. I came down. They said, are those the boots you were wearing? I go, yeah. He says, you got any questions? I said, am I hired? And he goes, yeah. So I know they were looking for a size 9. But other than that day started a bunch of stuff. I started in 1972, stayed on for 3 years, went in the Army for a couple of years, and then came back to the fire department and spent the rest of my career fighting fires up until 91, but by then I had already started training. I started training in 81, ended up at the Connecticut State Fire School. For those they think I have an accent, I'm from Connecticut, and so town called Wallingford. When I was there, and even still, is heavy chemicals. It had some American cyanamide there was at the time, and Bristol Myers Research Development was in there. And so I went on, and then since then I've had an opportunity to work on a bunch of projects. The pipeline program with Mike Hildebrand and Greg Knoll is now being used. I wrote Hazmat Exposures and Patient Care, and then went on to write a second book, which is a little more popular, which was Street Smart Hazmat, and have finished up most of my time in electricity and natural gas, simply because I just kind of stumbled into that on the tail end of pipelines to propane to natural gas and hazmat. That's about it. Anything else is just sounds like bragging. It's just, let's put it this way. For all those who are trying to be a consultant, all you have to do is, when somebody says, can you do that? All you got to do is say, yes, I can. And then figure out what you're going to do.
Now, Mike, that's very impressive. However, I think that's funny, but I don't think so. I'm sure you have to know your stuff. I'm sure you do. I've actually taken your class. I think you're a very dynamic speaker. I love listening to you. So now you're into electricity and natural gas, you say, correct?
Yep.
And what was your, how did you lead into that? Why do you feel that that's important nowadays?
Well, when I started with the pipeline with Mike and Greg, they were doing pipelines. However, I do a safety speech. It was actually kind of, for me, brought about because of Worcester. And it bothered me about Worcester because I do a lot of the mass hazmat programs, and I have a safety speech that says safety is a matter of numbers, beginning with number one. And I usually start out who's the most important person in the world, and they usually, everybody points to themselves. I said, well, not really, because the most important people in the world are the people you go home to. We're willing to give our lives up because of our jobs, but we forget about the people. Well, I do this for industry, and I kind of explain how the fire service may talk safety, but not necessarily practice what they preach, okay? And so with the anecdotal events, one of my favorite friends is an alter ego. I call it Gonzo. And Gonzo's given me a lot of stories, like can't tell how deep the puddle is until you step in it. And if you're getting shorter, then you know it's an acid. If you're getting shorter fast, it's a strong acid. So there's lessons that we all do that we don't think about. The civilians like that, at least safety, for me, that speech has carried me into places like Pacific Gas and Electric. They wanted that same speech 22 times for their people. And then at the end of it, they said, could you help us do some training for firefighters on electricity and gas? At the same time, we had lost a guy in Connecticut on an ice storm, backed into a telephone wire that had been compromised by a 7,300 volt line laid on top of it. And with the ice in the water, the conditions were absolutely right, and he was electrocuted. And that bothered me. Electricity deaths are absolutely preventable deaths in the fire service. I mean, if they understood the whole concept of electricity to be alive. And chapter 4 starts out, electricity is ideal H. That's the first line in chapter 4. Electricity is ideal H. Can kill you, can leave you permanently injured, and it interferes with your ability to escape because you can't run at the speed of light. Okay? So, that's why I enjoy the programs, and you make a difference. All of us that are doing safety. The only other speech I really made a difference is my colon speech that I talked about at the Hazmat conference in Houston, and colonoscopies, because I had a colonectomy because I had cancer. And I had 9 guys since I've done that speech come up and say they've had a colonectomy or colonoscopy and have found something. And they wouldn't have done it. Brave firemen are absolutely scared to death of DRE, the dreaded digital rectal examination. And yet it's the second leading cause of firefighter deaths is cancer.
Yeah.
So, and you're not going to find prostate unless somebody goes, who would leave a building in their first new district without going in and inspecting it?
Yep.
That's sad. Okay. That's a good point.
Yeah.
They leave it there.
I'm sure that's something to be actually proud of. I mean, I'm sure you're glad that that happened with, with those guys that actually did that after you had mentioned that. But I do have to tell you a story about electricity. When I was a young fireman, we had an incident, and we had a house fire and a big power line was laying in the driveway, and one of the electric workers, utility workers, said, "Hey, you can move that power line." And I said, "I'm not moving that power line." I said, "You move it." He goes, "I'm not moving it." And from then, luckily I was young at the time. I go, he told me I could move it. So if he's not moving it, I ain't moving it. But I'm with you, man. That's electricity.
Yeah.
That is bad news.
I don't like electricity. So Mike, tell us a little bit about how you got into hazmat.
Well, I got into hazmat because of, well, I always talk about the first time I got into hazmat. I came back from I don't even know if I may have come back from the Army. I think I had just come back from the Army. And we had a dumpster fire. And we got to the dumpster. I was on the nozzle. And as I pulled the lines off, I looked over my shoulder. There's this big red cloud coming out of the dumpster. And I went, "Oh, man, red cloud. Holy, wait till I get back and tell the guys this. I've never seen a red cloud before." And we start fighting the fire. And the second guy's got a pike. It's in the dumpster. So, he pikes it. We hear glass break. More red smoke comes up. So, after the obligatory 20-minute dumpster fire wait, after 20 minutes, you're allowed to fill it up. Okay, so you fill it up after 20 minutes, and up came these 1-liter bottles, and we hooked one, and we held it up, and I showed it to the officer, and he says, "Nitric acid." And I go, "Well, I can read too, Cap." I says, "But, what is it?" He goes, "That's the stuff they put in batteries." I said, "Oh, okay." And then I guess about 10 minutes, 20 minutes after that, being on the nozzle made me the closest guy. And so I started it off with burning wrists, burning eyes, difficulty breathing. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, I always tell this story because this is the God honest truth. I'm sitting on the back of the truck, having shortness of breath on the side of the truck, actually, with engine 2. And the assistant chief comes up and he says, "Callan, what's wrong with you?" I said, "I don't feel good, Chief. I'm having trouble breathing." And he goes, "Well, that's it right there. You're sitting over the diesel exhaust. Get on the other side of the truck. You'll start feeling better." So I went over there. I told him I wasn't feeling good. And so they sent us all to the hospital, and the doctors got all upset. And I have that. When I do this speech, sometimes I'll actually show you my chicken scratch injury report that says all the symptoms. If you knew what nitric acid does to you, well, the reason I say, you asked me how I got in, that's what got me there, because I started studying oxidizers. And the old society up in Massachusetts was doing the New York Chiefs every year, and they were going to do a hazmat program, and they said, "We need somebody to do oxidizers." They said, "Well, Callan knows all about oxidizers." My chief sent me up, and I became an oxidizer expert. And I knew I must have been an expert because at one FDIC class, I went to see a guy from, I think it was BOE, British Oxygen, and he was going to show a video. And I had done a video up for Fort Collins, Pooter Fire. And there was a company up there, and they needed an oxidizer guy, so I did video. He puts the video in, and I have to start watching myself. So I'm trying to get out of the room as quietly as possible because the guy says, "You're not going to stay and watch it?" I said, "No, I know that guy. That guy's an idiot." So that was basically how I launched my career in training was, I always say this. I'll give you another one. I took the first hazardous materials for the Fire Academy, Jan Kuzma's first class. He got the first class, and we're all in there, and it ran from Wednesday to Friday the following week. And none of us knew anything. And he didn't know how to teach firefighters, so he's just trying to teach chemistry. But we went out back, and we had guys. He brought a guy in that had sodium, and we would cut it off, and you would run past the bucket, drop the sodium in, and keep running. And then you got to a line, you could turn around and watch the sodium explode. That's how I came up with maximum human velocity. Those guys that couldn't run fast enough didn't get far enough away. But that was the way we did it back then. If you found chemicals, I won't say I set the fire, but I certainly filled the first floor of Meriden Fire Department with smoke from doing an experiment that I actually put a little too much oxidizers in And the next thing I knew, I had a small jet of flame coming up out of the crucible that I was working on. So, and you know, they said, "Is this normal?" I go, "Yeah, it's normal. I work with this stuff all the time." So
It's supposed to do that.
yeah, it always does. That's what I'm telling about. That's why you got to worry about an oxidizer, guys. So yeah, I'm actually lucky to be alive on multiple occasions, and grew into my expertise. I would say that I grew into my expertise.
I know. Ron Gore, one of the classes I took from him years ago, when I first got into hazmat, he said, "You know what? We didn't know what we were doing, how we were doing it. It was just dumb luck. Like you said, we're still alive, and we learned from our mistakes."
When you say Ron Gore, how would you like to know that the first time I saw Ron Gore was on a 16 millimeter film? and it was they had Jacksonville, and there's two guys up on top of an ammonia tank, and you got to watch real close, because one of the guys is working, and all of a sudden he starts shaking his hand. And he's shaking his hand a second time. And it's one of those days when you realize, well, maybe second gloving is a good idea, because he must have had a pinhole leak and he was getting burned. But unless you were an expert at that time, you wouldn't have recognized it. And he became, you know, we all become experts for things we don't do. You know, the thing about the fire academy was based on expertise, and it's always been that way. We were actually there. You couldn't drink yet at the fire academy. They didn't have a bar. You had to go downtown. You went downtown, you drank, and we sat around there. And most of the time, we were always comparing how close you came to dying. And if you were the best at almost dying, you didn't have to drink for the night. Okay. So I was up there with the nitric acid. That was pretty good. But there was a guy from somewhere in Kansas had gone into a sweet crude tank, got overcome. They pulled them out, had a heart attack, went down to the hospital, was off duty for 3 years, and came back on job again. And after that, he drank free. He drank free for the rest of the week, the rest of the class.
He was a winner. So Mike, you talked about your exposure to nitric acid, and you're talking about these other guys' exposures. And do you do anything with hazmat exposures? Have you heard of anything across the nation? Are people doing it? Is it a big thing? Is it not so big thing? I mean, we do it in Phoenix, but I don't think we do it as robustly as we probably should. We do it for large alarm fires, but we don't necessarily do it for all our hazmat incidents, or possibly any of our hazmat incidents.
Well, I also got bad ears. So when you say we do it, I lost what was it. Okay.
Exposure forms
okay, yeah.
Doing exposure forms or noting exposures that the hazmat members or the fire members were exposed to, and documenting those for future reference, or for future, documentation for any type of injuries.
Yeah, and I'll tell you how I look. I say we did it. Well, we never really did it. Okay, we would track in the log or something if you had a real big event, and like for the hazmat exposure, you had your medical records, and those things were there. But for me, I always look at it is because you're always going to have hazmat almost everywhere you go. And I've always I break down this, for me, my own, everybody has a signature course. What I mean, a signature course, which is, if you're a golfer, it's a hole. But if you're a hazmat guy, for me, I like the concepts of safe, unsafe, and dangerous. And if you can give me a playing field that only has 3 situations. So I have safe, which I always classify as controlled or uncontrolled. So as soon as you're in an uncontrolled state, you got a drum that's damaged. Doesn't mean that it's leaking, but if the bung is just on there with one more thread and you decide to pick it up, you just went from a bad situation to what I call a worse situation. But the concentrations are what dictate the problems for me. So I look at the nature. I always kind of explain to people, if you give me a material safety data sheet, I'm going to look at the exposures right away. Okay. And even if I don't have an ideal H, I'll take the PEL or one of those published exposure limits. And my argument is multiply it by 10. If I multiply it by 10, I end up with an ideal H. And as soon as I end up with an ideal H, I have a safe below the PEL. I say safe, and let's put it this way. I can drive industrial hygienists crazy. Okay, because they'll want to argue with me. And I'll say, yeah, that's fine. But you have people walking around with a little thing on their neck, taking samples for 8 hours. I got 14 guys in the street that want to go in. I barely have them in breathing apparatus. Okay. And they want to go in and do something because they feel like that's their job. They got to go in. And I said, that's fine if you go in on what I call happy chemicals like xylene, toluene. See, they don't see that hurting them. They don't like, we used to call them Uncle Bob calls. I don't know what you call them out in Phoenix, but Uncle Bob calls are somebody hasn't seen their uncle for 2 weeks, okay? And you always know an Uncle Bob call because there's a cop out on the front lawn throwing up because he's discovered that there's a chemical in there called putrescine or cadaverine. That's what an amine is. So if they understand that kind of an exposure, it's got to be documented. I wish I had documented my nitric acid. In fact, the incident I wish I had documented absolutely was I was on the truck and we were on top of a building. I know right where it is in Wallingford still. And we cut through the cement, okay, to ventilate. Me and 2 guys I went to fire school with, we coughed for about 2 weeks after that, okay? And we talk about it, but we never really documented it. And, this is one of those situations where, I know this sounds horrible, but in some cases, firefighters, at least in my generation, it would have been nice to starting to have some postmortems after we went on. Just not that we died from that, but of all the things that are kill us. I heard somebody, I use it now, I'm not stealing it. You just go with something, is firefighters of my generation, we used to joke, it says, we're already dead. We just don't know when. Okay. Is for some of the things that we were doing. I mean, eating smoke was, God.
It was normal.
Well, yeah, remember now, I came out in 71. Remember this, the graduate came out in 68, and the guy comes up to Dustin Hoffman and says, one word, kid, plastics. Okay. Plastics. Well, I know what plastics do because I had 4 or 5. They used to give us the old, what they called patties. They would extrude the plastic. It would come out, and it's what makes your rear light glass, all right, the orange and the ambers and things like that. They would give us what was left, and it would pour out and create, it really looked like a cow patty, and it would be a big one. We'd get 4 or 5 of them, and they would let us throw them in the tower, and we would set them on fire. We stopped that when we started getting green fire one night. We decided that green fire was bad.
It was bad, yeah.
And we're not going to do that anymore. So, I mean, that's not that we were stupid, but we just never thought as well as we could have thought. And, now the thing is, and I just talked about it the other day, guys like Meidel, James Meidel, Eugene Myers, all those books that were the only books I could go to in hazmat when I wanted to know something. I mean, my Eugene Myers book, I still have it. It falls apart when I open it up, still researching stuff. But they were so far ahead of their time that they were, I call it the Meidel effect, is that James Meidel knew so much. Okay. I met his wife at one of the California conferences. And said that what I learned from those guys just by reading their books at a time when I could understand them, because they could understand a lot further down the line than we have grown into that kind of legacy. It's one of the reasons why everything works so well today, is that it's not us, it's the guys that we learned from. I would say firefighters are nothing more than composites of what went before them. And we take all the good stuff and pass it down. And like I said, as an officer, we swallow the bad stuff. I mean, they would bitch it all the time. And they would say, you don't know what's going on. I said, no, you don't know how much I stop coming down to you guys.
Right.
Okay.
Well, that also brings up a good point too. And I was just talking about this in one of the classes we were doing. Is the fire service inherently, we beat our chest on how great of a job we do, but we never talk about what we screwed up. And we could keep other people from screwing up if we would just swallow our egos and our pride a little bit and say, hey, you know what? We did this and we probably shouldn't have because of X, Y, Z.
How many times have you read an after-action report that might make it to an article or something like that, and almost every firefighter is sitting there is reading between the lines and knows that it don't happen like that. That's how it happens 2 weeks later when you sit down to start writing about it. Right. But that ain't the way that it happened. It doesn't. It's funny because one of the exercises I do in class, sometimes I'll say, I know where the best firefighter in the world is right now. And they all start looking at me. I say, I know exactly where the best goddamn firefighter is in the United States right now. And they're looking at me and I say, he's sitting in your seat. I never seen a firefighter say, well, I'm a C+.
I've seen some that are C pluses. I've never heard them say that they're C+.
Well, this is why the first couple of hazmat classes that we used to do at Rockville for the International Hazmat Conference is they broke it down into beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Okay? I never had anybody in my intermediate class. I would have beginners, and then in the advanced class, I would just change the title and teach the beginner class. I would have chiefs come to me sometimes and say, hey, you know what? We call it Hazmat 3. We send it out in Connecticut State Fire School only for chief officers. You cannot send anybody but your designated second in command. We had guys wanting to come, and then when they came and we did basic recognition of hazardous materials. And they said, this is great. My guys need this. And I said, I know they do, Chief. I said, remember when I was there 2 years ago? He goes, yeah. He says, I did it for them. Right? Yeah. But what they were complaining about is that the senior leadership didn't have it yet. And it was tough because they were trying to institute things like, losing manpower constantly.
Right.
I mean, I started 4 and 5 men on a truck. I got left with 3. Okay.
Yeah.
And that seriously hampers whatever you want to accomplish. I mean, I know the cities have them, but, Main Street USA is going to pull in with 2 engines in a truck, lucky if there's a car, okay, and maybe 9 to 12 guys in a lot of the departments around the country. And then you give them a hazmat incident, and you open up the EPA, the old EPA books with 20-stage decon, okay? I have come down to boil that down to 2 things. All decon is wash, remove. And you just start adding them. And that there's an inside and there's an outside. And better draw the line where the difference is between inside and outside. I mean, it works for industry. Here is a big shower with a big ring on it. And if you get something on you, wash it off.
Right.
So, I mean, the lessons are there. We're very sophisticated. We've got all kinds of instrumentation, which always makes me laugh sometimes because I can tell you what it is, but it won't give me the concentration.
We got a question just popped up from one of our best buddies, Mr. Todd Burton. He wants to know, what advice do you give the new hazmatter, which is a great question. Because I want to add to that, not only new advice, but what do you think we should be doing that we're not? To kind of add on to that.
All right. I will tell you that for me, that I've got about 3 of them. Can I do 3?
Yeah.
I already gave you the first one. You go to a scene and you recognize awareness, recognition, and identification are the first 3 things we do. If you get there and you're aware there's a hazardous materials event, understand that it is not safe at that moment. It is unsafe, and rule out that it's not going to kill you. So, for example, we look at flammables. Okay, here's a good example. in hazmat, here's a lesson for all hazmat guys. I must teach it 100 times. If it's flammable, it's toxic. There's only 4 or 5 chemicals that are not toxic. And those are the light end hydrocarbons. Okay, hydrogen, helium, methane, ethane, butane, and propane. Those are not toxic. They're asphyxiants, but they're not toxic. You hit pentane, you hit it, any flammable liquid is toxic. So if you've got a combustible gas indicator in your hand and you're not wearing a breathing apparatus, I would sneak up behind you and slap you in the back of the head and say, what the hell are you doing? All toxics. And just because it beeps is not the line between when it gets bad. If you've got a meter and it says 3 and you're still walking in because it says 4 and then it says 5, I've asked them, what do you keep going in for? I want to hear it beep. So that's the second one. And the third one is one that I didn't have the opportunity to be told as a rookie. Always wear your mask. Okay.
I agree.
Yep.
Okay. Just understand. Now, my joke is in heaven, there's a man who sits in a book and he puts X's. There's a day you're born and a day you die. The day you were born is written in ink. The day you die is written in pencil. And then every day has an X. You go this way. But the guy in heaven is watching the end. And when you don't wear your mask, he gets to take 5 X's off. You go into a nitric acid spill, you lose about 10 or 15 of those X's. Maybe you lose a couple of months, okay? You get pneumonia 4 times for not always wearing your breathing apparatus. All this time, as these X's are going down. Here comes 1 X. Here comes you growing old. Here comes you, date of death going down. And when these 2 days meet, you get to heaven. And then God says to you, I was going to let you live to be 106. And you go, well, why didn't you? He says, you didn't wear your mask. Okay. You know,
Excellent point.
You know,
Remember that, young guys.
Yes. And the other one is when you see who's important, I'll tell you that first story about what always bothers me is, and I don't mean to belittle the fire service on this. I just want you to listen to it because it's always a touchy subject for me. But we send 27,000 men to a funeral, men and women to a guy's funeral. But all 27,000 don't take the time to find out the guy's name. And that guy had a family. Okay, that's what I took away from Worcester. Worcester was always bothered me that we lost those guys. Not that it was Worcester or any tactics at all, is that we lose 6 guys. I look at South Carolina and say, we lost, 9? 7 to 9? I can't remember off the top of my head at 72. Hell, I can't remember my name anymore without a name tag. But Bill Hand and I talk about this all the time. We get emotional. I was never emotional as a young firefighter. Old firefighters are emotional. They get upset when we lose somebody. Okay? It's not the nature of the job. That is not, you did not sign up to die. You signed up to help. Is there risk? Yes. Is the risk worth the benefit? Ludy Benner. Absolutely. But you better be sure that the risk is worth the benefit. You know, and that's the third thing or last one I would say to the new guy is learn how to analyze risk. Greg says it better than me. We're great risk takers. We're horrible risk analyzers. We don't look at risk, okay? And risk is what makes a difference. This is why we have risk-based response. But if it's invisible, odorless, and colorless, if you don't have a meter, you can't tell me what the risk is because you don't have a concentration. And all risk is how much chemical over how long. That's the exposure. We would come back to what you and I were talking about. I would always look at exposures as terms of concentration. Atmospheres are always the big problem. I mean, you know, yeah, we could eat them, but most of the time we breathe them. So
we got one last question before we have to wrap it up. This is, what is the one hazmat incident that you think all young firefighters should study and learn? From Mr.
I know the one, study and learn. All right, well, the first one, for me, the first one would be Blevies. And if you want to see any of them, go to YouTube and look at Kansas City and these firefighters back then. Now you say, oh, it's old, but if they knew what we knew, that wouldn't have happened. Okay. The second one is, and I'm not, it's a plug, but it really isn't a plug, is because it's the Lafayette Gas Explosion that I did a video on. Okay. And I always I met these two guys at Baltimore at Hunt Valley, and I'm doing a 10-second Lafayette Gas Explosion. You can find it on YouTube, search Lafayette Gas. Yep. I asked them, what were you thinking? Not that you didn't do it. I mean, they had a father and a baby in the basement. They heard them yelling. They're getting concentrations of almost the LEL, and they're trying to get this guy out. Okay. And all my civilians, even my gas people, say, why did they do that? I said, you don't understand. That's why that incident was why firefighters are put on earth. Okay. That was the risk was worth the benefit. And you know that one day you will have to step up to that. Not to make believe one where there may be somebody in there. Somebody's in there calling for you to help. They just talked about it yesterday. I just heard it this morning down in Florida. Yeah. I mean, even though while they were going up there to set and they were worried, they were still even looking for the small animals. Yeah. I mean, it's that risk. Okay. So that would be the other one I would worry about all the time is Blevies are number one because you deal with flammables. And the only other one is there's a couple of good, just search confined space. And anytime you see a confined space situation, think about it because that's the ultimate ideal H. That's why they call them permitted confined space because not only is it a confined space, but we're going to put something else in there that's going to kill you. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Yep. And Jeff does a great class on confined space and confined space incidents and stuff. Yep. Well, Mike, thank you very much for jumping on. If people want to reach out to you and get a hold of you, where can they find you at?
The best place to go is just MikeCallan.com, and you can see everything. That's kind of my. Then you can jump off to everything else if you want. If you're interested in the energy stuff, that's just Energy Emergencies, all one word. EnergyEmergencies.com, and anything in the world of pipelines and a couple of other things are there. But they can always call me, or you can call these guys. Just say, hey, I need Mike's email.
We can do that. Absolutely. Well, Mike, thanks again for jumping on. We really appreciate it. And we love talking to you and Bob Royal and Han and everybody else and Mike and Gray because as we talked about a while back, the younger guys don't get to hear these stories and they're not really putting the faces with the lessons learned and whatever. So that's kind of why we've changed it up a little bit to bring guys like yourself and those gentlemen on. And we really appreciate you coming on.
Well, that young gentleman that said about young firefighters, what's the difference between being street smart and wise?
What's that?
Age.
There you go. There you go. Well, everybody, this wraps up another episode of the Hazmat Guys Roundtable. Be sure to tune in again next month, first Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you then. And for the rest of us,